Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. This is the week in which big historical things could have happened, but they didn't. According to the Trump plan and the agreement between the two largest parties in the Knesset here in Israel, the Likud Party and the Blue and White Party, the state of Israel could extend sovereignty over 30% of that part of the land of Israel lying west of the Jordan River, or at least over the Jordan Valley, which is the natural defense border of Israel against invasion or attack from the east. While July 1st was simply an early target date and not meant to be the actual date for annexation, pro-sovereignty supporters believe that July is the last month by which such an event could even occur. They fear the gathering international forces against sovereignty will gain steam if our government allows too much time to go by without taking action about sovereignty. There are many reasons why this is so, not the least of which is that the Trump administration has been most supportive of Israel since Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel back in 1948, but the Trump administration may come to an abrupt end at the end of this year because of reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with Israel. No one foresaw the pandemic crisis, and no one could possibly foresee the breakdown of law and order in American cities. So this is a historic opportunity. While our most supportive American administration, the Trump administration, has its mind on other things, which makes sense, because the other things are more important to the administration itself. I'll say more about this in detail during the program. Thanks again for listening.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, you're back with Jay Shapiro. I want to say a few words about the possibility of Israel annexing certain portions of the Holy Land west of the Jordan River. The word of sovereignty is used, and also annexing is used. I believe that is an incorrect word, but I'll say more about it later. There are people, particularly in the United States in the Democratic Party, including the presumed Democratic candidate for president, Joe Biden, who think that a two-state solution is still somehow on the drawing board. The two-state advocates envision Israel withdrawing from more than 90% of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and evacuating most settlements. Today, there are more than 460,000 Jews living in 131 communities in the so-called West Bank. Nearly 30% live outside the so-called consensus blocks, which means if there were a two-state solution, Israel would be expected to dismantle 93 settlements and evacuate roughly 140,000 people. Now, I want to give a little history here to remind the listeners. When the Palestinians rejected the Prime Minister Begin's 1979 autonomy, he proposed autonomy then. Fewer than 10,000 Jews lived in the West Bank. Instead of stopping the growth of settlements and starting down the road to statehood, the Palestinians chose the path of violence, a path which they've been on since then. By the time the Oslo Agreement was signed in 1993, the settler population had grown to 130,000. In other words, in 1979 there were 10,000. In 1993 there were 130,000. Quite a difference. Instead of fulfilling the agreements that they had signed, the Palestinians resorted to violence and essentially not only killed Jews, but they killed the peace process. Now in 2000, the year 2000, Prime Minister Ehud Barak proposed dismantling most settlements, withdrawing from 97% of the West Bank, and establishing a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. By this time, in the year 2000, the settler population was 200,000 people, and former chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, rejected this offer. In 2008, the new president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, again turned down a similar deal offered by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. At that time, there were 270,000 Jews living in the area that the Palestinian Authority is supposed to become part of its sovereignty, if you will. Abbas refused to negotiate with Israel's prime ministers ever since, and the settler population has grown by almost 200,000 in that time and will continue to increase. So it's interesting, back in 1979, there were 10,000 Jews, and today there's more like 460,000 Jews. All the time this is occurring while the Palestinians refuse to sit down to negotiate or even take those parts that were already on the map for them. They would rather see an end of Israel than the beginning of a Palestinian state. Now, what's happening now? The Israeli government is contemplating, hopefully, to apply sovereignty over some parts of the so-called West Bank that are assigned to Israel under the Trump plan. Now, people are very concerned. What do their concerns include if Israel goes ahead? Well, there's a list of concerns. First, it might provoke a Palestinian uprising. It might damage relations with Jordan and Egypt. It might jeopardize the normalization of relations with the Gulf Arab states. It might aggravate relations with the European Union and cause them to impose sanctions. It might attract condemnation from the United Nations. It might exacerbate tensions between Israeli and American Jews. It might give ammunition to the demonization of Israel and to supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. It might strengthen critics and anger friends within the Democratic Party. It might gain recognition, or probably gain recognition from U.S. President Trump, that might be reversed by a potential President Joe Biden. Now, all of these are legitimate worries, very legitimate worries, and they have to be taken into consideration. Now, furthermore, some of Israel's closest friends, including Democrats in the Congress and Joe Biden, are speaking out against Israel taking unilateral action. Many American Jews who traditionally defer to the Israeli government on matters of war and peace have joined the critics. There have been articles in the Israeli papers by prominent American Jews against sovereignty. And it's not just the far left. Moderate and even some conservative Jews have joined this chorus against what Israel is likely to do. The bottom line, which makes it more ridiculous, is the fact at the moment we ourselves here in Israel do not know what the government is planning to do. And by the way, as I said in the beginning, you cannot use the word annexation. A nation cannot annex land over which it already has sovereign claims. What the government has not yet decided to do is not annex, but apply Israeli sovereignty. One option is to start with the Jordan Valley, which Israelis believe must be held for security reasons. Another option is to choose some or all of the consensus settlements, Jewish communities that even the Palestinians acknowledge would never be dismantled. Another option is to apply sovereignty to all the settlements as provided in the Trump plan and eliminate the possibility of any future withdrawal. Another option is some combination, most likely apply sovereignty to Jordan Valley and those settlements that are within the consensus. Another option is to put off action on the areas Israel expects to eventually take over and apply sovereignty to some of the others. Now, Israel has resisted doing anything about the territories because of the demographic dilemma of remaining a Jewish state and a democracy. Because one thing Israel does not want to do is to incorporate nearly 3 million Palestinians. Now, the Trump plan solves this problem by allowing Israel to maximize its territory and minimize the number of Palestinians who will be granted equal rights if they're willing to accept them. The number of Palestinians who would be granted equal rights to be like Israeli citizens if they wish is about 50,000 people according to the maps. The rest of the Palestinians would live under Palestinian sovereignty in perhaps 70% of the West Bank. So obviously, Israelis have not lost the desire for peace. But Israelis realized after they saw what happened when we withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005. This land for peace turned out to be a big bluff, and thousands of rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel, and they continue to be fired. Israelis are obviously not prepared to make additional territory concessions without ironclad guarantees that a Palestinian state will not can be what Gaza has become. So the chances of that are very likely. By the way, in the recent election, 80% of Israelis voted for parties that support the application of sovereignty. A poll was done recently by the Israel Democracy Institute, and they found that 58% agreed the move could lead to a third intifada. Nevertheless, 50% of the public supports applying Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank and primarily the Jordan Valley, which is our eastern defense line, and 25% of Israelis support a move with the U.S. administration's support, and an additional 25% would support it even without American support. That's an interesting number. I'll say more about this after the break. Jay Shapiro here. I'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Back with Jay Shapiro. I want to say a few more words about applying sovereignty to areas west of the Jordan River. That's the big item that is really on the table now. According to the Trump plan, Israel could have done so on the 5th of July. And so far, nothing's been done. But I want to talk about the implications and the meaning. As far as many people are concerned, and I think it's true, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strengthen our hold over territories that we legitimately claim as their own. The biggest complaint you hear is that from the people who are against it say that this will somehow threaten the two-state solution. You hear that, for example, from the Democratic Party in the United States. But that makes no sense. The reason there is no peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians is because the Palestinian Authority leadership refuses to acknowledge the Jewish people's claim to the land of Israel. Their official statements and policies, as well as the education they give to their kids in their textbooks and the television program in the Palestinian Authority, all say that the Jews have no rights to this area. If the Jews are indeed colonists, as the Palestinians contend they are, then they must be expelled because other colonists came here, like the British and the French and the Ottomans and other colonial powers, and they were indeed kicked out. So the Palestinian Authority has been subjugating the people in the Palestinian Authority, including the educational system, to this indoctrination. So now you have a situation where you have Mahmoud Abbas is really a weak leader, and he's not in a position to negotiate, and therefore, what does he do? He clings to the unrealistic demand for the full territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River for the Palestinians. Now, those people who use the term annexation, in a sense, agree to this Palestinian narrative. According to this logic, because Jews are foreigners, applying Israeli law to territory in Judea and Samaria is akin to annexation. If it's not our land, and if we pick up on it, to make it ours, we're annexing something that doesn't belong to us. The former prime minister who spoke out very clearly, Menachem Begin, used to say, you can annex foreign territory, you cannot annex your own country. And he just restated the truth. Judea and Samaria is Israel's country. Israel's historical claim to this territory, I'm afraid we have to remind people all the time. Our claim goes back over 3,000 years. And ever since Moses led the Israelites to this land after the exodus from Egypt, Jews have lived and exercised sovereignty in Israel. When they were kicked out 2,000 years ago, the Second Temple was destroyed, and Jews continued to live here. If you look at all the other ancient peoples, name them. I mean, most people can't even name them. The Amorites and the Jebusites, all kind of people were gone. Not only do they not have their land anymore, but the people themselves don't exist anymore. And the Jews have stuck it out in history. It is said that the premier, Frederick the Great of Prussia, the king of Prussia, the emperor, asked his people to give him, provide him a word that that proves there's a God, and they said the Jews, because we have stuck it out and not given up on our homeland. Everybody else is gone. The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, particularly in the late 19th century, and the creation of the state of Israel in the mid-20th century is not a story of a foreign people colonizing a foreign country. It is native people reuniting with their brothers and sisters in their own ancient homeland. 3 times a day for the last several thousand years, we pray in the direction of our ancient homeland. Israel's claim to Judea and Samaria, by the way, other than the religious claim, is also codified in international law. In 1920, there was a San Remo conference of the nations who had won the First World War, and this conference formed the basis for the League of Nations mandate. And after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, and the British were given the mandate for Palestine to establish a Jewish homeland. It was recognized at the San Remo conference. And so it was supposed to be British policy to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine. Those are the wording. That's the 1917 Balfour Declaration. So, in San Remo, the idea of a Jewish state became part of international law. And when the League of Nations went out of business, was taken over by the United Nations, their charter recognized all existing international treaties, including the mandate for Palestine. When finally the British left here in 1948, essentially the deed for the land transferred to a Jewish state. However, in the course of the Arab War against Israel, Jordan seized control of Judea and Samaria, which was an illegal act. They renamed it the West Bank of the Jordan River, but ultimately they relinquished all their claims upon signing a peace treaty with Israel back in 1995. No other state has a claim to historical sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and no non-state actor can assert sovereignty over a territory it has never possessed. These are the facts. So extending Israeli law will serve as a reality check against those who believe annexation will destabilize the region. After liberating Judea and Samaria back in 1967, unifying Jerusalem in the Six-Day War, Israel extended sovereignty to the eastern part of Jerusalem, Today, there are millions of visitors come to Jerusalem every year. It's a place where people of all faiths can practice their religion in peace. Only under Israeli control has this been possible. When Jordan ruled over this area from 1948 to 1967, Jews could not come here at all, let alone pray here. Simply not allowed to be here at all. Israel changed all this and opened it up for everybody. So that's interesting. No non-state actor like the Palestinian Authority can assert sovereignty of a territory it has never possessed. So it's really important. In 1981, in one of the most important acts of Begin's career, Israel extended sovereignty to the Golan Heights. That decision ensured that Syria, our neighbor to the northeast, could no longer use the commanding heights, the Golan Heights, to launch shells against defenseless Israeli farming villages. Today, the Golan's topography provides Israel a buffer against the Syrian civil war, which has been raging for years. And it's also our Golan Heights is a place to disrupt Iran's attempt to send arms to the terrorist proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. These are the facts on the ground. There's a lot of violence in the Middle East, none of which has to do with Israel's sovereignty. The violence across the Middle East is because of Iran's ambitions, terrorist organizations, inter-Arab rivalries, all kind of reasons, nothing having to do with the Jewish state or Jewish sovereignty. I believe, and I think it is true, I'm just stating it here for the program, history and international law is on Israel's side. And given the Palestinians' continuous unwillingness to negotiate with and recognize Israel as a Jewish state, Israel's government will probably begin the internal discussion on how to apply sovereignty to our lands in Judea and Samaria. There's nothing about annexation here. It's our decision which has to be made sooner because of the upcoming election in the United States, possibility of a Democratic administration, which has already said it's opposed to Israeli sovereignty. Our decision has to be made in the very, very immediate future. That's the responsibility of our leadership, and hopefully they will take this much needed and necessary historic action. This is a moment that may not repeat itself. I'll be back after the break.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
We're back with Jay Shapiro. As I mentioned in the introduction, no action has been taken by our government concerning annexation. What we have is no clarity. the issue remains wrapped in a veil of ambiguity that denies the public any opportunity for a real debate about the application of Israeli law and administration, the extension of sovereignty to areas now formally under a military government. The Prime Minister has provided no information about the geographical extent, the timing, the sequencing, or the conditions and circumstances under which annexation will be pursued. This means that it is impossible to get any useful sense of how the public really views this issue. All the opinion polls thus far yield different results for different scenarios. In fact, the degree of public support for annexation depends on which areas might be annexed, whether or not there is agreement with the Americans about the map, whether or not there's agreement within the ruling coalition, whether or not there's coordination with other regional actors and nations, and whether or not the action is contextualized by the Trump plan, which is conditioned on endorsement of some kind of Palestinian pseudo-state to which many on the right here are categorically opposed. There is only one way to determine how much the public will support or oppose, but rather the specific proposal must be presented, not vague general principles about sovereignty and unilateral action. We are in a situation where we need a method which is to condition approval of any detailed proposal to add to the sovereign territory of Israel in the same procedure that the right-wing parties ensured will apply to proposals to abstract from the sovereign territory of Israel. Now, this brings us to something very important. Basic law referendum, which was passed in 2014. It was passed during one of Netanyahu's previous terms as prime minister, and it was essentially meant to prevent any hypothetical concessions in East Jerusalem or the Golan Heights for future governments by giving opponents of concessions, even not a majority, a veto over the process. That is what the basic law is served to do. The basic law stipulates that the law, jurisdiction, and administration of the State of Israel shall no longer apply to territory where they currently apply, only if any renunciation of sovereignty is approved either by a Knesset supermajority of 80 out of 120, or by an absolute majority of the Knesset members and by public referendum. The procedure by which Netanyahu plans to secure approval of whatever annexation he intends to propose is, like the extent, timing, and context of the move, quite obscure today. Still, it is reasonable to expect that he will rely on the precedents of East Jerusalem, which was done back in 1967, right after the Six-Day War, and the Golan Heights, which was done in 1981 by the government under Menachem Begin, and he, Netanyahu, can content himself with the requirements of a simple Knesset majority. These actions, by the way, do not make East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights as Israeli as other parts like Tel Aviv and even el-Fachim, which is an Israeli Arab city. In East Jerusalem, the Israeli educational curriculum has still not been imposed on Arab schools. They have their own curriculum, and in both places, citizenship has not been imposed on the non-Jewish residents, but only made optional. In other words, the Arabs living in East Jerusalem can become Israeli citizens if they so choose. More to the point, both of these prior actions were far less divisive than what Netanyahu appears to be intending to do now. Moreover, both those votes occurred long before the passage of the referendum law. So this raises some very serious questions. Why should the unilateral extension of Israeli sovereign territory now be considered a matter of lesser national importance than would be the contraction to make smaller, even if part of a broader agreement of sovereign territory. Why should expansion be subject to far less rigorous procedures than withdrawal? Why should the bar to conceding sovereign territory be set so much higher than the bar for acquiring sovereign territory? Our government is in a contradiction. Application of the provisions of the Basic Law referendum to any proposed annexation, whatever its extent, will do nothing to mitigate the regional and international implications of such a move. Whatever those implications may be, nobody, except perhaps U.S. President Donald Trump, will endorse Israeli sovereignty over any annexed territory just because an unequivocal majority of Israeli voters formally approved bringing it under Israeli law. We hear from all over the world, including the European Union, of course, from the Arab states, that they are violently opposed to annexation of Israel by any territory, and they're threatening all kinds of responses. So it's a tough situation. The Palestinians will not be appeased just because annexation is done in a democratic way. The reaction of the Palestinians could well raise the immediate security risks and economic costs of continued Israeli control of territory Israel already controls. Because, for example, the Palestinian Authority is threatening that if Israel applies annexation to any new territories, the Palestinian Authority will give up and disappear and make Israel responsible for everything that's happening now in the areas under the Palestinian Authority. As it is right now, Israel maintains defense control. There are Israeli soldiers in the Palestinian areas because of a fear of terrorism, but there is no Israeli local governmental control. That's in the hands of the Palestinian Authority, which might throw up its hands and say, we're giving up. We no longer will run our area, and thrust it back into the hands of Israel. Today, the Israeli forces have complete freedom of action in the area called the West Bank, including the areas to be annexed. Annexation, according to those opposed to it, contributes nothing to security. So there are a lot of people here in Israel who are worried that an unilateral annexation will trigger a chain reaction beyond Israel's control. So that's a big problem. Whatever these implications may be, nobody knows what's going to happen. And as I said, the Palestinians will not be appeased. Their reactions could well raise the immediate security risk and economic costs of continued Israeli control of territory that Israel already controls. Still, requiring a Knesset supermajority, or at least an absolute majority, plus a referendum will at least, according to some people, allow the Prime Minister to validate his long-standing claim that he speaks and acts on behalf of the people. Now, this would be a very good time to put that claim to the test. This is a very important historical situation going to affect our future in a big way. And the question we have to ask ourselves, or the questions we have to ask ourselves, is whether Israel will be stuck administering the lives of millions of Palestinians with no end in sight, or will every Israeli household feel the economic burden of funding the needs of millions of Palestinians? And the Israeli army could be forced to deploy forces in all the Palestinian population centers in the West Bank and Gaza. And then, of course, will Hamas launch a campaign of terror against Israelis and igniting the Gaza Strip as well. So, and if the Palestinian Authority goes out of existence and no security cooperation, will Hamas seize this vacuum to pursue its ambition for control of the West Bank also? So this is a really serious situation now. As of the 1st of July, our government could make a decision, and we, the population of Israel, have heard absolutely nothing from the government at all about the timing, the extent, and all the important details of annexation. So, in that sense, our government is failing us by not providing the population with the kind of information it needs to understand what's happening and to make intelligent decisions. This is a very difficult situation we are in right now, and as of today, there's nothing in the future you can see that's going to resolve this. So I just wanted to share these thoughts with the listeners. I'll be back after the break.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.